Good morning, Janice.
Good morning, Anthony.
Today we're going to answer a listener's question, and we're going to talk about how to set your virtual paralegal hourly rate. Well, actually, before I go into the listener's question, my dad actually asked me, hey, how come you're mixing in these virtual paralegal talks with your executor and probate and personal finance talks? And just for anyone else who's wondering, the shorter answer is we have a lot of fans. Janice has a lot of fans who listen.
And cool.
They want to know what it's like. There is a lot of overlap because there are many paralegals, virtual paralegals, who support probate and estate attorneys. Is that right, Janice?
Oh, absolutely. Yes, definitely.
So, and then just by virtue of the fact that, so many of our listeners are virtual paralegals, they have just all these questions for Janice. So we're trying our best to speak to our audience. So that's the answer, Dad.
Hi, Dad. Pretty cool.
That was weird saying Dad. I usually call him Appa, but for some reason it came out in English. But anyway, all right. So the question from our listener is, can you cover how to set prices as a virtual paralegal business owner? Price high enough to cover the paralegal salary, subscriptions, training, marketing, etc. Thank you. So Janice, are you going to be able to cover that for us today?
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Cool. So I have a little outline that you provided. You're going to help answer this question by talking about how to calculate overhead, how to work backwards from an office salary. I think I got that right. Yeah. Market research to know your competitors and their pricing. Make sure to mark up for any special training or experience that you have. And lastly, don't forget about taxes. So Janice, please take us away.
First of all, thank you so much for the listeners for asking questions. I think that's phenomenal, and I'm happy to be able to provide a little bit of information on this topic. So jumping right in, first part of the question was about overhead, subscriptions, marketing, training, supplies. I can tell you for me personally, I consider these office overhead. So I do not typically pass them along, these specific expenditures, along to my attorney clients. So I will budget them annually and just make sure that my profits outweigh these expenses. I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense?
No, I get it. So like things like specific, FedExes or papers, those are things you can bill directly to your attorney or to the client. But things like, just give me an example. What's an example of subscription you might, not be able to pass on?
Okay, I have quite a few subscriptions to like Dropbox and Adobe and some of the really good, software programs. I eat that cost. That's part of my overhead. I don't know how I would even pass that along to have a Dropbox subscription with, 15 clients. That's just how the cost of running business. Maybe that's a better way to put it. That's the cost of running business. So those are types of subscriptions that I eat as part of it.
Cool. That makes sense.
Yeah. So then another way to look at this is to work backwards from an office salary. So I have always said, every time I talk about this, and you can go online and see the same thing, is that if you're going to be a virtual paralegal, it's recommended, highly, highly, highly recommended, that you start first in an office setting. It's much easier. I've gone into this at length on other podcasts and such, but you should definitely start there. And this is yet another reason, because it's easy to figure out how much you should be charging by looking at what you're making in an office, right? If you're making $10 in an office, you should expect around that amount if you're outside the office. But there is a few ways to calculate it. So when you're calculating your base salary, you also have to add in bonuses, paid time off, health insurance. So even though you may be making, let's say, $60,000 a year, which is about $30 an hour, when you add in all that other stuff you get, maybe that's another $10,000, then you're really making $35 an hour. So you'll set your rate around there comparatively to what you're making in an office.
And tying this back to your first point, you have to make sure that this exceeds your expenses, your overhead. Otherwise, you're not really taking that home. Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have to, and again, talked about this before, that you may not be working 40 hours a week at $35 an hour or even $10 an hour, whatever it is. You have to account for that and be realistic on how much you'll actually be making, because it's not a guaranteed set of hours being in a virtual world. So that brings me to the next point, which is market research, your competitors. What are other people setting it as? I'm not one, honestly, to really share what I bill per hour, because it's so different in every market, right? If you provide services, let's say for someone in New York, case in point, versus somebody in, Alabama or Georgia. The cost of living is way different, right? If you were even sitting in an office setting in those two places, it's going to be different. So you have to look at your market and see what it is in those particular areas, depending on where you're going to provide services. And you have to be realistic, competitive, but realistic. So you can't come in underneath, but you also don't want to come in too far over. So it's definitely important to do your research. Look online, looked at LinkedIn, and they'll tell you how much we're hiring, part-time employee, whatever an hour. Take that all into consideration and look at everything.
Yeah, that was a good tip to look at job postings and the advertised salaries as your starting point for researching. Is there any way to research your peers, your other virtual assistants or virtual paralegals?
So very rarely have I seen the actual hourly rate listed online, because same thing, you may be providing services to people all over the country, so it may be very different in different areas, and also in different. We can talk about this on the next one. Markup for special training and experience. Mm-hmm. Some of these are very specific. So family law is kind of broad, right? But if you specialize in something and you have a very a niche, that is hard to find, and you have something to offer that others don't, you can charge more for that, right? If your specialty is something, you can add on more. On the flip side of that, if you're just getting out of school, you've never been in a law office, you have zero experience, it is completely unrealistic to charge $35 an hour or $75,000 a year. It's not going to happen. You have to be realistic. What would you get if you were going out into the field as a newbie? You have to start there.
Does it necessarily, markups can be for not necessarily special training, but what if it's just like a second language or?
Absolutely. Yeah. One of my specialties is Excel. Mm-hmm. I'm really good at it, know it inside out and backwards. So I do find that I'm able to take on projects and different people because of that advanced skill set. And it's something that, maybe other people don't have, that you can say, you can raise your rate a little bit because I have advanced training. It's simple things like that if you have that maybe others don't. It's always in every profession that leg up.
Sure.
And then most importantly, it's great if you figure out your hourly rate and your overhead, but what you need to remember is that as a virtual paralegal, you are an independent contractor. You have to pay your taxes, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody is going to send them in for you. No one is going to pay them for you. You have to account for that in the big picture. So while it's all well and good, you might be making, let's just say a good, $20 an hour, and it's going into your bank and it looks really great. Don't forget, you have to pay taxes on that. And that can be forgotten.
Well, are there any, we talked about this in one of our tax podcasts, but do you W-2 yourself yet, or
No.
are you still on Schedule C or?
Yes. Yep. So I put, a certain percentage away of everything that comes in that goes to taxes. So I do it that way. I know one of the words inside of the question was about salaries. Mm-hmm. We're typically all independent contractors, so it's a little bit different. You can set your business up that way to be, like you said, the W-2 with the taxes. But if you are a solo independent virtual paralegal, you're on your own.
Yeah, I think you're forgetting. We talked about this, and at the end of that episode, you said, I'm going to talk to my accountant and maybe talk about looking to switching to a W-2, but I guess you didn't.
No, we're kind of in the middle of this little pandemic thing, and taxes are coming up, so I haven't quite gotten the chance to, but yeah, that is on my list. Yeah, but no, that's definitely an option if you want to. But either way, whether it's coming W-2 or the other one, you have to account for that when you're doing the math and setting up your budget and making sure you're going to make money.
Cool. Thank you for that,
Janice. I hope
Janice.
that helps.
Yeah,
No
I hope we answered the question. Let us know in the comments if there's anything else you want to dig into or any other questions. Janice, what's the best way for folks to learn more about you as a virtual paralegal for attorneys, or as a peer or sort of community leader
Absolutely.
for that group? Yeah.
So they can just visit me online, virtualparalegalpa.com. There's a blog on there. It does talk a little bit about salary versus how much you can save by using a virtual paralegal. And there's also, I just did a CLE for one of our local paralegal groups where I just talked about this. And of course, we've done quite a few podcasts on this subject. So, but start the website, start on Anthony's podcasts, and hopefully there'll be some more information for you.
All right, cool. Thanks, Janice, for sharing. I'm sure our listeners appreciate it. And we'll talk again next time.
Talk soon. Thank you.
Bye now.